Thanks everyone for joining us. We're here today with our wonderful friend, Jennifer Grant. Jen's an author and editor based in Chicago and contributed to volume 2 of How to Heal Our Divides. Her picture book, Maybe God is Like That Too, won a gold medal from the Moonbeam Spirit Awards for Excellence in Children's Literature and was named a Book of the Year finalist in the Forward Indies Awards. Her second picture book, Maybe I Can Love My Neighbor Too, was named a Junior Library Guild official gold standard selection. She's written several other children's books, including 2 new titles coming out this year. Jen has written for publications including Women's Day and Chicago Parent. For more than a decade, she wrote features, restaurant profiles, and general interest columns for Sun Times Media and worked as a health and family columnist for the Chicago Tribune. Jen divides her time between her own creative work as an editor, and as an editorial consultant. She's spoken at many writers' conferences, including, of course, Writing for Your Life. And Jen also developed the faith and food section of the Compassionate Christianity website. Jen received her master's degree in English literature from Southern Methodist University. She's a member of SCBWI, the Authors Guild, Sigma Tau Delta, which is the International English Honor Society, and the 2030 Collaborative's Faith-Based Coalition for Global Nutrition. Jen is a founding member of Inc., a creative collective, and is proud to serve on the boards of both Open Books and The Secret City. Jen lives in Chicago with her husband, rescue dog Scarlet, and occasionally some of her 4 grown children when they come back to the nest for a roost. You can learn more at jennifergrant.com. So Jen, as always, it's great to speak with you and catch up, and many congratulations on all of your accomplishments.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm happy that we can talk today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So to start off, what else would you like people to know than what I touched on there briefly?
Let's see. I guess something that I've been thinking about a lot, and maybe it's this wonderful turn of the weather in Chicago, is that I've become, over the last few years, more and more obsessed with the natural world. And my last couple of books for adults and for kids sort of, show that. But I spend a lot of time looking out the window at trees and birds, and I tend to just really daydream about, today, for instance, I was walking my dog and I was looking at these new trees that have been just put in on our street. And I just love thinking about their growth, and that they will probably be big, beautiful trees after I have long gone from this earth. And so I love to think about the cycle of life and about nature. And, I always love it when people send me articles or books that they've read about the natural world. So I guess I'm inviting that from our friends in this community to keep sending me, wonderful articles that you're reading and book titles about nature.
Interesting. Well, one of the things I love about this time of the year is that the birds are just singing like crazy.
Yeah.
That's been true
Hmm.
more this year than I can ever remember.
Hmm.
We have more trees growing up, around us where we live too. And so it's just like a multiplicity of birds, it seems like.
That's awesome.
So we have lots of different things to talk about today, partly because Jen and I have collaborated on several different fronts. So as you know, I'm in the early stages of launching another new business called Find Your Next Calling. You've had several significant shifts in your career. And maybe I'd really love for you to talk a little bit about discernment, kind of like, have you reflected much on the process or processes that you used to determine some of those career shifts?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've done both kind of formal work with coaches, with like an executive coach. I think I mentioned her before with you, but I've done formal sort of going to someone who's an expert in helping people craft their careers. And I've spoken to maybe 2 coaches like that over the years, and worked, with one of them a couple of times a month for a year, so it was a real process. And I think it is helpful sometimes, we all get kind of lost in our head, and, we've got our desires, our need to, generate income, all these different things. The life situation that we're in, there are people who are raising little kids. There are people who have a full-time job that they need to keep no matter what. And then, and yet their dreams and their desires are knocking up against those things. I think it can be really helpful to speak to an expert, to look and find a coach, because sort of like, it's almost like going to therapy, but it's not about your emotional or psychological health. It's really about like having someone who can just look at your set of skills, your life experiences, your the realities of your life, that you have kids, that you have whatever responsibilities, and say, okay, have you ever thought about doing it this way? And so they've seen and talked with so many people, and they know, they understand kind of the margins of what people have in their life, and they can help kind of shift you. And so that those kind of formal situations where I've received the help of a coach have been really helpful in discernment. I think too, and it sounds kind of, I don't know, cliche, but there are different seasons in a person's life, and, when I'm talking with writers who are, maybe sooner into, they're not as long into their writing career as I am, or they have really young children, or they're struggling financially or whatever it is. And they think, oh, how are you doing all these things? And I want to say, well, didn't always look like this, right? I mean, there were many, many years of my life where the only responsibility I had in terms of writing, that's why I worked, you mentioned that I was a newspaper columnist. That's why I did that. I did that so that I would keep my writing muscles up. So sometimes I wrote 800 words a week, when I was writing my column. And it wasn't hours and hours, every day. It was one Thursday afternoon when I had a babysitter, And so, I mean, I think that, I think it is really important also to do the things that really bring you joy. I mean, I think that, and I actually had to relearn that message again this year, which was, I took on some editorial projects that I just wasn't really sure if I was a good fit for them, or I wasn't really sure I wanted to do it, but I thought, oh, well, I'll do it. And I so regretted it. And so I'm trying to remind myself not to settle for jobs or situations or even relationships that aren't really life-giving. And in your heart, if something stirs you, a project or a person or an experience, you can feel it if you listen, right? And if you have some time of stillness. So that's the kind of more, intuitive part of discerning your career and jobs and so on, is to have enough silence, or to make time for silence so you can really listen to where you're being led. And, for people of faith, we can believe, that the Spirit leads us, and so we need to create some silence and some quiet and stillness so that we can listen and we can hear. I've wrote somewhere, I don't even remember where, but I was so moved years ago talking with this monk who lives in community in the Boston area with other monks. And he talked about the fact that they live mostly in silence. And I asked about that. And he said, yeah, there's just so much to hear from God. And I thought, wow, that's not how I experience now. Ironically, like the time when I was writing this piece about this man and talking with him was a really busy, crazy time in my life with kids, 4 little kids at home, and driving them places and making their meals and making their lunches and, trying to raise them. And the thought of sitting, 10 hours a day in silence, I couldn't even wrap my mind around that. Now, though, as an empty nester, I have lots of time for silence. And so I encourage people to be mindful of the time of life that they're in, and to know that whatever time it is, it's not going to be forever. But you can also, everyone can make some time, to reflect and to take some time just to be still and to be quiet and to try to listen to their intuition, to the Spirit, whatever you want to call that. So I guess that's a two-part answer to your question about discernment. I think it is helpful to talk to someone who understands and who can give good guidance. And it's important to be quiet and listen.
Mm, mm. Well, you've been like a freelancer longer than I have. But one of the things I've learned too is something you touched on, which is basically learning what to say no to, right? And have that, for me at least, it's been heavily guided by, what I'm either passionate about or not.
Mm-hmm.
Because I found like my own internal motivation has to be to a certain level for me to do a good job of something. And if
Right.
it's not at that level, I ought to just not even bother.
Right. It's a slog. Yeah.
It's like,
Right. Yeah.
I wish I had more self-discipline. That might not be the case, but that's definitely true for me.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I had a sort of responsibility to manage some volunteers years ago. And I initially kind of thought, oh, I'll ask this person to do this and I'll ask this based on their skills and all this stuff. And I kept kind of, it kept failing. Like I wasn't able to fill the positions that I needed to.
Mm.
But when instead I asked people, what really brings you joy? And it was not necessarily what I would have assumed based on their skill set. And so it's surprising. And I think if we do try to be led by joy rather than a sense of duty or, oh, well, I've always been good at math, so I better be the treasurer, or whatever. If we can, yeah, to your point about feeling passionate about something, feeling joy when you think about the fact that you get to do it instead of I have to do this.
Yeah.
What do you get to do? So
Yeah. It's a privileged opportunity.
yeah.
So outside of the coaches, and things like that, are there particular people or reference materials or email newsletters or, other kinds of things that you found to be helpful with discernment?
Mm-hmm. Well, I just read this morning, every Thursday I get this James Clear. He wrote Atomic Habits. I've not read that book, but it's a best-selling book about creating and maintaining really great habits in your life.
Hmm.
He has a free newsletter that comes out once a week and I love it. And his name again is James Clear. And I've heard him interviewed on podcasts and so on, really like his ideas. Haven't read his book. But I find I find that helpful. I like to listen to different podcasts. I follow Lisa Congdon, who is an artist, and she has a class. It's like 9 video lessons, and it's called Time Management and Productivity for Creatives. And I did this sort of near the beginning of lockdown in 2020. And although you can do it over the course of, well, however long you want to do it, because it's videos, I did it all in a day. And it was the most, it was only a few, it's probably 2.5 or 3 hours altogether. But it was the most helpful thing for me as a freelancer and as a person who writes and edits and has volunteer jobs and all these different things. But she just kind of lays out a very clear way of organizing your time and projects. And so that everything is sort of, you can see everything at once. And it's basically sort of it's worth I think it was $25 to take this course, but it's worth the time just to have these ideas kind of cemented. But it's kind of like making a spreadsheet, like of all your different projects, small projects, medium ones, and noting where you are. And so for me, I have various clients that I have to invoice. I've got different deadlines for different people. And they're kind of sometimes fluid. If I'm editing, I have to wait, of course, for the person to have written the first draft. So if I have that all in one place, then when I'm sitting down to work, I can kind of skim over it instead of like looking through different emails or trying to find a text. I get things from clients, by email, by text. Sometimes somebody will send like an Instagram direct message, all those different things. And if I leave it there, I will certainly lose it. If I go to my workflow document that I created after taking this Lisa Congdon online class thing, I just put it all in there, and then I don't have a missing piece. And so it's really helpful because then you're not spinning your wheels like trying to find information,
Mm,
you know.
mm,
So, and I've also, like, in terms of writing projects, and it's a similar idea. I use that Scrivener, which is a software. And so every time I have an idea about a project, I go to that project, just throw it in there.
mm.
Then again, I'm not looking for a Post-it note somewhere. I mean, of course, I'm always jotting little things on pieces of paper, but if I leave it on the piece of paper, I will certainly lose it or not understand why did I write that weird sentence, you know. But if I come home from being out and I've got a few little pieces of paper or the back, and this is often true, the back of a UPS,
Mm,
you know,
mm,
receipt or
mm,
something, and I've written some idea, if I put it right into Scrivener in the proper
mm,
project,
mm.
then I don't lose it and I know the context for it. So I think organization is so important for creative people, for freelancers, for writers, because we have so many different ideas and projects and responsibilities kind of swirling. If we can keep things organized, then when we actually have time to sit down and write, we're not wasting it looking for some little piece of information. So
I personally hate it when I know I'm looking for something that either was a document or idea or whatever, and I can't find it.
yeah,
Right. I
yeah,
mean, as good as Google search and, all this kind of thing is,
right.
Google Drive with search function, all that stuff, it's still, so a lot of times my version of what you're saying was that I'll send an email to myself
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and jot down something like that. So then when I get back in front of my computer, I can take that little note and then place it in my
Yeah,
file system, where it belongs on a particular project or whatever.
yeah, yeah. And I'm sure you're super organized because you have all these big things with moving parts and so many people, and it's so important to stay. You could spend your whole day just looking for, where is that document? Yeah,
Well, it's just kind of interesting. Different people have their own mechanisms,
right.
for kind of managing, themselves as well as
Yeah,
their, kind of information flow,
yeah.
workflow,
Hmm.
so, and there's, I would say not one right answer. I
Right.
know, like you talked about your spreadsheet dashboard.
Hmm.
I've kind of tried that. I'm not a spreadsheet person. I've used them, for financial stuff, but I use Word documents more,
Hmm.
for my kind of, self-management structure, so to speak,
Yeah,
and Google
yeah.
Drive with the folders and, things like that. So,
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, some people are allergic to spreadsheets, and I think I used to be a little bit before I took that course with her. But I guess I mean, it doesn't matter what, everybody knows what is and isn't working. So
right.
if anyone's listening and they think, well, I can never find my thing, try it. There are so many different ways that you can organize your work life and your creative life. So I encourage people just to find the one that works for them and just stick with it, you know.
The other thing that's huge for me is my calendar.
Mhm.
It's kind of like my to-do list because I'll
Mhm.
block out, times on my calendar, say, okay, this is when you're going to do this. This is when you're going to do that. And
Yeah,
maybe, they move around, right, based on shifting priorities, but, it kind of sets the discipline for me,
yeah,
to get it done. And it also basically is a prioritization tool.
yeah, yeah,
Once it gets on my calendar is what gets done. And if it's not on my calendar, it doesn't exist, so, uh,
yeah. And I've heard people say, don't create a to-do list. If there's something you
yeah,
need to go on your calendar and figure out when you're going to do it. And obviously too with Google Calendar, if you put in, write this piece or edit this, it reminds you, if you put it, Thursday afternoon at 3, I need to write this piece. Then at 10 to 3, you'll get a reminder, which is also,
yeah.
so yeah, I think I think that's another really helpful thing, that if, for freelancers, for writers, not to have this long to-do list, but instead to block out time on your calendar and use your calendar as a to-do list. That's a great one. Yeah.
For me, it's huge. I mean, it's just a make or break kind of a thing. But I mean,
Yeah.
again, that's just me. I mean, I'm not saying that's applicable to everybody, but uh,
Right.
it's incredibly helpful for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, as you well know, building awareness about one's work has grown in importance,
Mhm.
aka marketing, to use the dirty word. What steps have you found to be most effective recently? As this whole landscape just continues to shift.
Mhm. Well, I mean, I would say this, and I've said this to you over the years many times, but I think it's not my strength so much. But I guess I used to be more self-critical about that, like that I'm not great at like promoting my work and, making a big wave about it. At the same time, I wonder, just like as you were saying about different people organize their time differently and it works for them. In some ways, like, I never promote or I don't try to promote, for instance, my editorial consulting because I have too much of that. And I really love the things that I am doing. And I need to say no most of the time to projects. So in some ways, and this maybe isn't the kind of answer you were hoping for or thinking about, but in some ways, like playing the long game and doing really good work, I guess I'm less about, I guess I haven't done the work that some of our friends like Glenna Snellis, who's brilliant at promoting her books and puts a lot of energy into that. I haven't done nearly as much as she has done. At the same time, I guess because I'm playing the long game of just trying to grow as a writer, grow as an editor, deliver to clients and to agents and editors and so on and deliver quality material. So I guess I feel like I've had longevity in terms of my writing and editing because I work hard. I try to be really communicative. I get that feedback a lot from clients and from editors that they appreciate how much I communicate. So if they send me something, even if I don't have time to read it, then I'll say I received it, or whatever. So I guess for me, I do have the sort of career I wanted, like I have interesting clients to work with and I'm helping to shepherd books into the world that I think are important and good. And it doesn't make me famous for being an editor or something like that. I mean, I've done so much ghostwriting more recently and often have to sign an NDA. And so I can't even tell you for whom or whatever. But if I really love the project and believe in it, and that kind of ripples into new projects because that person will recommend me to someone else. And so it's very satisfying work. I love it. So I guess that didn't really answer your question about promoting one's work or career, but I don't know.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe not in a traditional marketing sense or whatever,
Yeah.
but I mean, let's dig deeper on this a little bit. You
Mhm.
pointed to kind of like your, communicative, your responsiveness. And I know you're very diligent about deadlines and things like that. But at the end of the day, what that does in my mind is build a track record of relationships
Mhm.
with
Mhm.
people that basically over time have led to you being oversubscribed, right,
Mhm.
in terms of opportunities
Mhm.
and means you don't have to do,
Right.
the kind of outbound marketing, in a traditional sense.
Mhm.
So I think that's such a key learning and a key
Yeah.
aspect. And back to our earlier, part of the conversation, we talked about the long run. We talked about how, you know, what may or may not work today may work, at some point in time. And
Mhm.
it's like you there was a point in your career where you didn't have those relationships. You didn't have that
Right.
record established, right? And now
That's
you
right.
do. So there's a certain part of, I'll say, patience,
Mhm.
perseverance, the view of the long haul, as you mentioned, that is just so crucial.
Yep. Yep. No, and creating and maintaining our networks are so important. And,
Yes.
not just when you need something, not just if, but keeping in touch with people, checking in with them. I think it's helpful too to have to keep notes on personal things. So if someone, you have a meeting with a new editor or a literary agent and they tell you something like, oh, I'm going to Florida with my grandchildren next week, write that down. And so that next month you can say, how was that? And that creates a trust and a relationship too, like not just looking at what a person can do for you by hiring you, but seeing them as a real person, knowing that they have a full life going on just like you do. And that helps as well. So yeah, I think maintaining a network is very important. And being consistent.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the best titles for a business book that I ever read was Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty.
That's great. That's great.
Right.
Yeah.
It was all about, establishing relationships,
Yeah.
for the long run,
Right.
whether or not it appears to be useful or productive or whatever at this
Right.
point in time. And I've seen that play out for myself so many times of,
Yeah.
things that people with which I've established a relationship for one thing, later on ended up being a phenomenal collaborator for something I'd never envisioned even considering.
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly. And people can snip it out so quickly if someone just wants something from you. It
Yeah.
doesn't help
Yeah.
it, and so but if someone wants to collaborate or wants your ideas or wants, to share resources or idea, whatever, that feels so different than someone just asking, what can you do for me? You
Hmm.
know?
Hmm.
Yeah.
So you've done some great presentations talking about overcoming the imposter syndrome,
Mhm.
which is a really important thing, not just for authors, but I would say for people, going off and freelancing on their own in general.
Mhm.
So, excuse me. Can you talk a little bit about what some of your recommendations were there?
Yeah. I mean, one thing that whenever I've spoken about this, and I have several times now in person or on Zoom or whatever, spoken about this, people are always so relieved to know they're not the only one. So it's always great, like to say, no, you're not the only person who feels like a phony, who's afraid that everyone's going to find out that you really are not that smart or talented or good at your job or whatever it is. Um, so, um, so it's a relief in groups just to say to everyone, this is normal. And it isn't just people in the creative fields. I was just meeting with a neighbor who has some job opportunities and she's in business and she was feeling she's being welcomed to apply for this really high profile job. And she said, but the last person who had it was older than me, was more experienced or, all these things. But but the fact that 30 people in her company are asking her to do it, it
Wow.
means that they see her as the proper person to have the job. So it's very normal, across industries and professions and so on to feel this way. And it's not really the same as feeling insecure. It's like feeling like in some ways, I think, and the kind of research shows this as well, but that it's often people who really are excellent at what they do. But when you are smart and you do care about what you're doing, you also know what you lack, right? And so um,
Yep.
that can leave someone feeling like an imposter, but there are great strategies that actually work for battling those feelings. And one is just admitting that you're feeling these feelings, acknowledging it. And in positive psychology, it's called like name it to tame it. So by saying, saying to someone else, I'm experiencing feelings of being an imposter, or, just saying it does something in the brain to
Hmm. Hmm.
grab on you. Another one, and there's a famous TED Talk. I think it's in the top 10 I've watched TED Talks, but Amy Cuddy, Dr. Amy Cuddy, and it's Cuddy. She talks about power poses. And so if you're going into a new situation and you're feeling like an imposter, you're feeling insecure about a meeting or whatever it is, a presentation you have to give, she recommends like going off into like a bathroom stall or a, broom closet or something and doing like power poses, like putting your hands up, standing up straight, sitting up straight. And she talks about, how our brain changes and the brain chemistry changes based on the way we're holding ourselves. So,
Wow.
like, doing like power poses, like stand like Superman, these things, if you do that for a few minutes before entering a situation or a meeting that you're feeling like an imposter, that will help. One that I love is another strategy is that, again, because people who are experiencing these feelings are experts often in their fields, we all do have gaps in our knowledge, gaps in our experience, and that's just normal. And so by identifying what those are and then taking steps to increase your knowledge or increase your expertise, that's a way instead of feeling like, oh, I'm an imposter, I'm terrible at this, it's saying, yeah, I'm great at this. There's some areas I can grow. Guess what? I can take a class. I can talk to someone. I can hire a coach. I can actually address the gaps in my knowledge, the gaps in my experience. And that's one that I think is really important for writers too, because a person sitting at home feeling like, oh, I'm not really a writer. I'm not really great at this. I'm not, I'm an imposter. I've never published anything traditionally or whatever. Well, what are some of the areas that you know are weaker areas for you? Is it, dialogue if you're a fiction writer? Is it, you know, plotting? Is it, what are the things that are your weaker spots? And if you're not sure, ask some of your readers, ask the people in your writers group, what do you think are my strengths as a writer? What are my weaknesses? And if you identify that, then go ahead and address it. And that's so empowering. Take a class, get a book out of the library about whatever that little gap in your knowledge or your skill set is. And then you don't feel like an imposter. You feel like a learner. You feel like a person who's growing and not like a person who has to hide out and can't share what they've done because they're not that good at it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And outside of the writing realm, where it's so much dependent upon you as an individual, in a lot of other instances, more generally in business in particular, to the extent that you can partner with somebody
Right.
who is an expert in whatever it is that you're feeling less skilled in,
Right.
that
Right.
could go, a long ways to
Absolutely.
bolster that and make an
Yeah.
overall solution or overall, offer, much more
Yeah.
valuable.
Yeah. Hiding out and isolating isn't the answer at
Yeah,
all.
yeah.
Yeah. I love this. Another podcast that I really like that's helpful in terms of discernment, also in terms of organizing one's time and so on, is Akimbo, which is the Seth Godin one.
Oh,
And
okay.
I heard a great episode of Akimbo once where he said his whole point in it was show your work. And to your point about partnering with someone and collaborating with someone, sometimes writers don't show their work. They go off and write and they're just nervous that it's not good or they want to polish it before showing anyone. It's so helpful as many times and throughout the process of writing a manuscript, whether it's 1,000 words or 80,000, to keep talking with someone, partner with
Mm.
someone, show the editor, show a writing partner, barter, trade services with another person and say, listen, I'm writing this. Can you read every 10,000 words and tell me what you think as I'm going? Don't wait till the end, but show your work as you go.
Mm. Very cool. So independent of all the things that we've been collaborating on and talking about so far, um, are there any future books or other projects that you'd like to share with people?
Well, so just a couple months ago, my book Finding Calm in Nature came out, which is for kids, kind of 7 to 10ish, and I love that book. It's so beautifully illustrated by an illustrator named Erin Brown, and so I'm doing a few sort of events around that right now, story times and things. And then this fall in October, also from Beaming Books, that Finding Common Nature is Beaming Books. Another book called What If I Can't Explain God is coming out, and that's a picture book, and it's about a little kid who's finds a lot of things hard to explain, including God. Who doesn't, right? And so that'll be out in October. And then just in terms of my own creative work, I'm doing a lot of editorial consulting right now
Mm.
and some ghostwriting, which is really a pleasure. And I have clients I really like right now. And then I'm continuing to work. I've been working on a novel the last couple of years, and so when I'm not doing that editorial work, I've been doing that. But in terms of like other books for kids, a lot of ideas I always do, but nothing that's right on the edge other than the one that's coming out in October.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Jen, as always, it's such a pleasure to catch up with you. I really love all the work that you've done, and certainly have loved all the ways that we've been able to work together. And I thank you for that, and wish you all the best for all the different projects that you're involved in.
Well, thank you so much.
Bye for now. Thanks so much.